Bezos is under fire after the Amazon founder and the world's richest man thanked Amazon workers for funding his trip to space aboard his company Blue Origin's New Shepard launch vehicle.
Amazon founder and billionaire Jeff Bezos has sparked a flurry of criticism this week after thanking his workers for paying for his flight into space. After touching back down in his company Blue Origin's rocket ship, Bezos and his crewmates exchanged hugs and popped champagne. He then thanked Amazon employees for making his trip possible.
I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer, because you guys paid for all of this.
But not all were happy with those remarks coming from the world's richest man. U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, quote, "Yes, Amazon workers did pay for this, with lower wages, union busting, a frenzied and inhumane workplace, and delivery drivers not having health insurance during a pandemic. And Amazon customers are paying for it, with Amazon abusing their market power to hurt small business." Meanwhile, labor union president Stuart Applebaum told Reuters the comments by Bezos were obscene.
It's outrageous that Jeff Bezos says his rocket ship amusement park ride was paid for by his workers. He could have done a lot more for humanity if instead he paid his workers fairly and spent the money that was necessary to protect their health and safety and their lives. There is so much more Jeff Bezos should be doing for his employees. And now to say that they're the ones who paid for his joyride is obscene.
Bezos, who founded Blue Origin in 2000, has said he hopes to develop a fleet of reusable spacecraft and build a future where people can live and work in space. He says Blue Origin is planning on 2 more New Shepard passenger flights later this year.
And I'm joined live from Washington, D.C. by Dr. Tanya Harrison, who's a planetary scientist and manager of the science programs at Planet Labs. Dr. Harrison, thank you so much for joining us here today on A News. Now, throw back to my childhood when the Apollo trips were landing on the moon. The recent excitement with this space travel with, first of all, Richard Branson and then Jeff Bezos and shortly to come Elon Musk traveling is bringing up a new excitement for space travel again. Do you see it becoming something commonplace in the future, or is this really just another small step for mankind?
I think we're just seeing the beginning of opening this up to a realm where more people could afford to do something like this. It's stuck in the realm of the ultra rich right now. These flights are estimated to have ticket prices of $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously unattainable to most people, including myself.
And me.
But but if we look at the history of air travel, for example, it used to cost $5,000 to fly across the United States, and now on some airlines you can get low-cost carrier tickets for $50 or $100. And so it's really a matter of scaling. It has to be something that takes off, no pun intended. Enough people want to actually utilize this, and that will help drive the prices down. So we'll just have to see what happens as the first few of these flights happen, both from Blue Origin and from Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's company, and see if the market is there. Are people actually going to utilize this now that this capability is here?
If we look back at the history of forays into space over the last 50, 60 years, it's always been strongly associated solely with science and the scientific benefits. Even if we look at the television series that were around in those days, like Star Trek and dare I say, Space Odyssey 2001. These were all science-oriented, and now we're pushing towards opening it up, which is great, but at the same time, there's a great deal of controversy about the danger to the environment of doing this. What are the realities?
Right now, the contribution to, say, carbon in the atmosphere from things like rocket launches is minuscule compared to the contributions from things like massive factories and cars on the road. And so it's not something that is a huge concern right now, but if it's something that really does become, high traffic in the future, we'd probably want to take a look at that. And even though we're shifting kind of the narrative from science to entertainment with the focus of some of these flights, there is still a science component to them. Blue Origin has been launching science payloads on all of their test flights of the New Shepard rocket, which is the same one that launched these humans into space. They were doing scientific experiments aboard the Virgin Galactic flights. And the goal here is that hopefully now, instead of having to basically hand off your experiment to an astronaut to take it, say, to the space station and run it for you, you could actually have scientists become astronauts on these commercial missions and run their experiments themselves. So it's opening up a whole new opportunity for doing science in a different environment and not having to go through all of the expense and the testing and the rigor of taking it to the International Space Station.
Well, one of the comments that Jeff Bezos has been making following the flight, at least I think he made it after the flight, was that this is opening the door for exploiting space, for maybe some industries to be conducted in space. And I see the second book on your shelf there is Life on Mars, which obviously is a target that many are interested in, notwithstanding yourself, I'm sure. Is this a reality, and are there dangers associated with exploitation, which is a negative word in itself?
Absolutely. I think there is this idea that there are tons of resources on the moon and in asteroids, and we could mine them, and then that will deal with some of the shortages or the environmental issues that we have on Earth. But that brings up the ethical question of, should we really be living beyond our means of the planet that we're on to a point where we need to look beyond our planet to utilize resources? To me, that seems extremely, unsustainable in the long term, just from the expense, but it also feels very environmentally irresponsible. We should instead be figuring out better ways to utilize the resources that we have here and live on Earth more sustainably. Eventually, we'll want to go and, hopefully have humans living on the moon and living on Mars, and we'll want to utilize the resources at those places for us to live sustainably on each of those worlds. But I don't think that we should look at other bodies in the solar system as the thing that will help sustain us here on Earth in the long term.
Well, certainly there's some people we might like to send to some of those planets, but seriously, I know you're passionate about planetary exploration. So what are the benefits, from a scientific point of view, so we move away from the tourism, from a scientific point of view, what are the benefits to humankind of extending our space exploration at this point?
The biggest bonus is that we have robots that can do really fantastic things, but they're still not a substitution for human speed and ingenuity and ability. And so if we send humans to places like the moon and Mars to really understand them, we can do a lot more science a lot more quickly. And studying those worlds tell us a lot about how the Earth formed, the history of our solar system, the history of the universe, and it helps us put the Earth in context in the universe. Right now, we're the only planet where we've discovered life. And so are we an anomaly? Was there never life anywhere else in the solar system? Or was there life on Mars that has since died out? Or there's life that's still there, hiding in some nook and cranny that is just waiting to be discovered? That will really help us understand how unique Earth really is or not, and to put humans and life in general in the context of the entire universe.
Well, it is certainly phenomenal how things have developed since the days of Apollo, and totally appreciate that the computational power to send the Apollo rockets up, the computers were probably minuscule compared with the ability that my phone has today. So we've come on with huge leaps and bounds. Where do you see? So if we go back 50 years to the Apollo, if we jump forward 50 years, where do you think we'll be?
Well, I think it's going to be so hard to predict with how much the space landscape has changed in just the last 5 to 10 years. I would say 5 to 10 years ago, no one would have believed that we would be launching and landing rockets on, almost a weekly basis. It was still sort of a pie in the sky idea that tourists would be going into space, other than, a couple of folks that have paid to go to the International Space Station, but it's not a regular thing. So I think probably in the next 10 years, we will hopefully at least see people return to the moon. In the next 50 years, I'm hoping humans will have gone to Mars. Maybe we will have established our first scientific base there, sort of like we have in Antarctica with scientists working. But things might work more rapidly than we could ever have anticipated, just comparing the leaps and bounds of the 50 years before Apollo to landing on the moon. And now having gone from landing on the moon to having explored every single planet in our solar system, it's going to be a wild ride, that's for sure.
I'm sure in creating the Star Trek series, Gene Roddenberry was thinking about the legal aspects of space as well. Now, that hasn't been talked about. Space at the moment, as far as I understand, is a fairly free domain, with different countries sending astronauts up and satellites up, and indeed with commercial companies now entering the foray. Is there some need for regulation of space, or is that something as a scientist that you'd balk against?
There's definitely a need for regulation. Right now, there is something called the Outer Space Treaty, which prevents any country from owning anything on another celestial body, but it doesn't technically prevent any company for staking claims on other celestial bodies. And so this is a technicality that's been discussed quite a bit as commercial companies like SpaceX start demonstrating the ability to potentially land on other worlds. And this was something that up until just a few years ago was solely in the realm of government space agencies. So you have that side of things, and you also have this explosion in the number of space agencies that you're seeing in countries around the world whose abilities are growing very, very quickly. And so you do have sort of a national security discussion that's been happening over, should we be concerned about different space actors and what their intentions might be, not necessarily on places like the moon or Mars, but even just in our own backyard in Earth orbit? Do we need to make sure from an ethical standpoint that we don't take up all of the useful orbits in terms of countries that are spacefaring now, so that there are no useful orbits left when nations that have not reached spacefaring status would like to launch their own satellites? So there's a lot of things to take into account here, and I'm sure the space law sector, which is actually a very active thing, is having a lot of discussions around these things right now.
Well, I'm sure they're having out of this world discussions at this very moment. Dr. Tanya Harrison, thank you so much for joining us here today on A News. Fascinating speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.